Steve. As some of you know that you've been here before, we have no slides in this program and no formal introductions because I don't know about you, but I don't like watching anything where the introduction takes longer than the show. And so Steve shouldn't need an introduction anyway. I'm sure you've read the blurb, but I regard Steve as a friend. We've known each other for 25 years or thereabouts. But I think Steve is the world's leading expert in workplace culture. And I'm very, very happy to introduce him to a number of my clients over the years. So Steve, welcome.
Thanks, mate. Don't set expectations too high. Goodness me.
But welcome, and I'm sure we're going to have an engaging conversation. The format is that really I'm going to basically start with a question for Steve, and I've got a few questions that he and I have sort of talked about, but it's a free flow conversation. It goes wherever it goes, and so feel most welcome to come in at any time and join in the conversation. We'll go till about 4:40, so about an hour from here, and I'm sure Steve's happy to hang around if you have something specific after that, but it's a free flow conversation. So Steve, I think the obvious question is to work, you've got this concept of UGRs, and it's been used to transform cultures. So let's start with, what are UGRs?
UGRs stands for Unwritten Ground Rules. Actually, I should ask Jamie to define this for us, shouldn't I, Jamie? UGR stands for Unwritten Ground Rules. I mentioned Jamie because Jamie's one of the guys in the room now whose company's gone through the UGRs process. But UGR stands for Unwritten Ground Rules, which I define as people's perceptions of this is the way we do things around here. Now, for those of you who are interested in culture, that definition is vitally important. People's perceptions of this is the way we do things around here. So that can include things like, at our meetings, it isn't worth complaining because we know nothing will get done. The only time anyone gets spoken to by the boss is when something is wrong. The company talks about the importance of customer service, but we know they don't really mean it, so we don't really have to worry about it, and so on. So these drive our behaviours, yet they are seldom, if ever, talked about openly. It's the UGRs, the Unwritten Ground Rules, that constitute a team or an organisation's culture. Culture and UGRs are one and the same thing. Culture is simply people's perceptions of this is the way we do things around here. And in the vast majority of cases, we deduce them. That is, as a new employee, we will normally stay quieter than we otherwise would be. Why? Because unconsciously, for the vast majority of us, unconsciously, we are tuning in to the UGRs. We're finding out things like, well, I'm going to put this back to you in a moment. We're looking at things unconsciously. We're looking for cues and clues to inform us about what the UGRs are. Why do we want to check out why we're staying quieter? To check out the UGRs. Why? In order that we can conform. They're that powerful. The vast majority of us conform to what we believe are the prevailing UGRs. And as a side note, and I'll pause after this, as a side note, and I've not explored any of this at all, but Anne, who I know very well, who's on this call, would know better than me about this. My view is that, and this is a side note, although we can go down this path if you want, my view is that a massive, and I would put to you, unexplored reason for workplace stress is that when we feel compelled to conform to UGRs that go against our moral code. And to my knowledge, I might be horribly wrong here, to my knowledge, my belief is that that is a massively unexplored, but a massive contributor to workplace stress. But yeah, there you go. I'll stop there and pause, Anne.
I can confirm the last bit anecdotally, but Anne may have more detail. And by the way, folks, I will look at some of our next gatherings at the end, but Anne is our guest next month. So it's probably timely that we're going to segue into mental health in the workplace, and in particular, we're looking at navigating the minefield when we talk with Anne, but creating emotionally smart workplaces. So, but Anne, you might have something for now. Is Steve on the money?
Absolutely. I mean, at one extreme, you would never work for a tobacco company if you didn't agree with smoking or you weren't a smoker, so you'd probably make that call up front. But you just think of some of the organisations that have collapsed when unethical processes or procedures have taken place and people have been frightened to speak up, or just simply the behaviours, like I don't want to go to the legal profession and harassment right now, but there's been some unspoken ground rules about you don't talk judges or lawyers who might be doing the wrong thing. So yeah, I agree with you, Steve. If you're not in a culture and environment where you can call out behaviours that are incongruent with your own or with the stated values of the organisation, high stress factor.
I suspect, Steve and Anne, that the reverse of this is what happened in a few hotels in Melbourne to do with security guards. I'd say it's the reverse of this.
Well, yeah, don't get me going on that one. So, you know, like I've done a lot of work with mining companies, and there is a common UGR in mining companies, which is, and by the way, and we need to get in this path as well, UGRs are not always negative. So the examples I've given are negative, but they're not always negative. If you're on a positive team right now, by definition, there are positive UGRs. It has to be that way. If you're on an ordinary team right now, by definition, there are ordinary UGRs. We're human beings, we'll inevitably have a mix. The key question, and this is the fundamental leadership question, are our current UGRs a function of luck or chance, or are they by design? And my personal view is that in the vast majority of cases, the prevailing UGRs are a function of luck or chance and not by design. And I think there's a leader responsibility to grab a hold of this and say, no, we are going to collectively fight for the kind of culture that's going to satisfy two criteria. One, what's going to make this a great place to work, and two, what's going to ensure our future success into the future. So, you know, we ought to be fighting explicitly for this. But back to the mining example, I've worked with mining companies and many of them have a UGR, never stated, but very strongly driving people's behaviour, which says around here, production is more important than safety. Now, in the hotel companies, in the security companies for these quarantine hotels, Anne, there was a very clear UGR, and it was making money is more important than anything else for our business. We will cut corners, do anything, do cashies on the side, forget, you know, training, because making money is the only important thing here. So, you know, like I say, these sometimes are very easy to deduce, but other times much more subtle. And as another aside, I would argue that the subtle ones are potentially no less powerful. But anyway, I'm going all over the place. I'll pause.
Interesting that we talk about design. I would say that the key to that design is that it must be human-centered. In other words, the focus needs to be on people and the person way before the product or the service, way before the profit, which in my view is an outcome of being good at business, but never a reason for being in business. And so that lines up, of course, with values. And in my view, values don't work in most organisations because they're words, not behaviours. I see some nods around. So let's get other folk involved here. What's the Simone?
I have a question, Steve. Just through, I guess, the couple of examples you've given from a more recent perspective, with the mining companies, Could it be, though, from that safety culture, because there's a lack of process that is done? So when we talk about not necessarily by design, it comes out from the fact that there isn't the appropriate process. And in a similar way with the hotels, that there wasn't potentially the time to put that process in as well.
Simone, I think it fundamentally comes down to what leaders regard as most important. I think it's as simple as that. Now, in the mining examples, shortcuts are taken, safety protocols are breached if production is threatened. So in that instance, the priority is money and the next day's, production. I was working with a company called Next. Many of you would know Next in the UK. They're massive. They used to be bricks and mortar. They've moved heavily towards online. And I did UGRs with their IT division, which has 600 people in it. I mean, this is a rather large IT division, 600 people literally. And I said to their leaders, and I think this is I don't want to sound immodest, but I think this is a really good question. I said to them, if I went to your people and you're not in the room and they're being candid and open and honest with me, and I asked them this question, how would they answer it? The question is this: what are your leaders' top 3 priorities? Now, I don't know about you, but I reckon that's a really good question. What are your to his immense credit, after a pregnant pause, one of the leaders in the room said, Steve, we don't even know what our top 3 priorities are, so how would they? So we had a laugh about that. But the point was taken, because, when I bring this back to culture, my question to leaders is, number 1, do you want culture to be a top 3 priority? And number 2, if so, what is it that we can do to demonstrate without ambiguity that it is actually a top 3 priority? And Simone, it's a long way to answer your question, but what's the top 3 priorities in those mining companies? Making money, making money, making money. That's it, and nothing else matters. So, it can be a function of KPIs and what we talk about as leadership teams and all this sort of stuff. But, so we're either serious about this or not. That's the point I make to leadership teams. You don't go to jail if culture's not a top 3 priority. But fundamentally, you've got to ask yourselves the question, are we serious about this or not? And if you're not sold on it, then I won't waste any of your time. In fact, you're wasting your time paying me right now, We're either serious about this or not. If we're serious, then I think what prevents moves on culture change is because it's seen as too complicated. So if we pass the first hurdle, we're serious about this, really, then the next hurdle is, well, do we know what to do? Well, that's where UGRs can come into, I think, massive play, because everyone gets UGRs.
Right, Michael, I see a raised hand there. Yep.
Your microphone, Michael.
Just unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was saying, when Simone asked the question, I've got quite a bit of experience, not with hushing dogs, unfortunately, but in the mining experience, in the mining business and oil and gas resources coming from WA. But that's where we spend a good portion of our time, and with our consultancy as well. So just to pinpoint, when you, if I heard it correctly, you're suggesting, is it a lack of process, or the processes aren't good enough, or they're not embraced enough? Is that a reasonable understanding of where you were going or what you were trying to determine from that, Simone?
Yeah, so that was part of the reason behind it, was I go, well, if there wasn't the process, but Steve has answered it really beautifully to go, well, really, what are the leaders' priorities? So if the leaders' priorities are making money, versus if the leaders' priorities is safety first, then there would actually be a process around safety put in.
Well, yeah, and it goes even further than that, unfortunately, is these organizations, and not alone, are heavy on process, and they're even reasonably good on process improvement. So the processes themselves are good, but that's a tool. and it doesn't matter. You have to either be good at using the tool or not. If you're a craftsman, a craftsperson, you're either you can use that saw, or you're not good at using that saw, but it's the best saw in the world. So let's not judge it by the process or the quality of the process. It comes down more to the character and the UGRs, as Steve quite succinctly put. It is what the leadership's priorities are, without a doubt. Even in safety is an interesting animal, because there's a behavioral aspect to safety. And if you don't reach that behavioral aspect, which is the tapping into the actual individual's want and need to do it, all the process in the world won't matter. I'll excuse myself for a moment and get rid of my dog.
Obviously, your dog's got a great opinion here, Michael. We should allow him or her to speak up.
Well, I think he's actually much more competent and capable in this aspect than me too. At least he's louder. Excuse me for a moment.
Could it be that purpose pretty much trumps everything else? If your purpose is to make money, then your priority is going to follow.
Well, yeah, I guess. I guess. I feel so frustrated with the fact that there are so many unhappy people in workplaces. And I know this is a fact because we can find out what the current UGRs are. Like, we might be able to get to that point, but we can find out what the current UGRs are in a business. And we've been doing this for 30 years in many different countries. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of unhappy people in the workplace. And you know what? There's probably a certain percentage of people put on this planet who are born to be sad sacks. But the vast majority of people do not want it to be that way. The vast, vast majority. And they have actually, and I include leaders in this group, they've actually given up hope of it being any different. They confine themselves to be prisoners of being unhappy. And when we give people an opportunity to grab a hold of the current culture and fight for a better one, there is nothing more exciting in the workplace than I've seen take place. And I speak firsthand here because I was working with the guys in Kmart in their transformation across Australia and New Zealand. And I don't know if any of you know this, but Kmart had literally lost money for 10 years in a row. 10 consecutive years it lost money. Look at the business now. $500 million in profit, but more importantly, a brilliant culture. And now that culture, and it used to have a toxic, awful culture. I mean, I can tell you, Anne had something to do with Kmart as well, and she could tell you as well that stores would ring in their head office, as it was then called. It's support office now, words matter. Stores would ring into head office, as it was then called, and the phones would ring out. There was internal warfare between departments. It was awful. Now the staff protect the brilliant culture. They have pride in it. And I think most people want to be part of a dynamic, positive, productive, hardworking, fun team, but so many people don't know how to get there. And so they give up. And that's as sad as it can be.
And maybe too, I see this as well, is that there's a polarity between the leadership team and the rest of the workplace. Like, I'm amazed, for example, there's a number of leadership teams who are out doing strategy sessions at the moment, but they're not involving employees. Which, to me, how can it possibly work if you don't ask the people who are going to execute? How can you possibly do that?
They all fall into the 70% of failed change initiatives that has been around for 30 years and hasn't changed, and because they haven't gotten enough feedback, input, and engagement all along the whole process.
Or they don't listen to it. I mean, the amount of times that I've seen organisational engagement surveys, for example, and the leadership team either doesn't read it or never gets back to people to thank them for doing it, and never responds to any of the things that were raised. And this is an unwritten ground rule, maybe, Steve, where, you know, we ask people, but we don't reply to them. You know, we're really just window dressing. An unwritten ground rule is, you know, the reason we're asking you questions is not because we want to give you answers. We just want to look good.
And that more often than not is not conscious.
Mm.
That's the tricky bit to this. This is not, the vast majority of leaders do not go out to thinking every day, how can I make the culture worse? This is a function largely of ignorance, I'm sure. So number one, we need, what is the business for leadership teams? We need to give them clarity about what is the business case for culture. And if they don't get the business case, then rightly, they're not going to focus on it. So if I'm going to work with a company, that's my number one job, to make absolutely sure that the leaders are crystal on what is the business case for culture. And if any of you want to go in this path, I've got the answer for you. In a single question, I can create the business case for culture in one single question, and it's this question. If the culture of our workplace was to become as good as it realistically could, how much improvement would there be on people's performance/productivity? Now, we did some research on this, so when I present this, I can show the results I've got from research. And we gave a sliding scale that started at 0 because 0 is a legitimate answer. You might think the culture now realistically is as good as it's going to get. So 0 is a legitimate answer. And then we gave people a sliding scale, 10%, 20, up to 100 and 100% plus. But before I ever show the results, I will say to leadership teams, what percentage, what's your answer? The question again, if the culture of our workplace was to become as good as it realistically could, how much improvement would there be on people's performance/productivity? Now, I've done this a lot. And when I did it,
I think it's a big number.
Well, yeah, when I did it, pre-COVID, would any of you like to guess what the average percentage was that would come out from leadership teams?
Leadership teams, not the force as a
leadership
whole, right?
teams, senior leadership teams, have a guess. And look, you know, I haven't, this is anecdotal, but this percentage comes out as an average so commonly that I'm very confident in sharing what I'm going to share with you. Because I've got research to back this up, but just when I do it face to face, anyone want to give me a guess at a percentage?
I've read your research, so I'll have to default myself.
Somebody else.
70%, I'd say.
Someone else?
Any advance on 70?
You have to remember that these people are wedded to their current cultures, or at least their organizations, or they think they're doing the right thing. So already, so they have to put it in context of that. Yeah.
From my perspective, I think what leaders would think naturally would be, 15 to 20%, so quite low. But I think the actual percentage is something like 500-fold.
Yeah.
Okay, so I won't stretch this out. The average that I get is 40%. 40%. Now, when it comes out, I will say to people, "Are you serious?" And they'll go, "Yeah." And I'll go, "Well, let's presume you're wildly over-optimistic. Halve it. Let's make it 20%. Would you take it?" And I tell them that the correct answer here is, duh. 20%. Where else would you get a 20% performance improvement? Through what other program, initiative, implementation would you ever get a 20% improvement in performance? So if I'm feeling cheeky, I will say to the leaders, if you don't tell the board what you've just told me, because if you've intuitively known that there is that capacity for performance improvement and you've not acted on it, well, then shame on you. So I won't go. I'll only do that if I've got good connections with them. But that's the business case for culture, right? I mean, if people aren't sitting on the edge of their chairs wanting to tap into this now, then we're not a good fit. So the first hurdle is good intentions. The next hurdle is business case. And then the next bit's easy, because the next bit is, well, how? How do we do this? Well, that's UGRs.
One of the things, Steve, that I think would be interesting, I'd be interested in your views, how much has changed from BC, before Corona, to the DC world now, where we're still in it, and we've got an AC and after Corona world coming as well. How much do you think there's been a shift in prevailing attitudes and so on? Let's have a chat around that.
So I was speaking about, it was probably 2 or 3 weeks in after COVID, before the 2 or 3 weeks into the lockdown. And I spoke with a senior manager from a large franchise company in Australia and rang him with the pure intention of saying, how are things? That was my only intention in calling. Actually, it gets me a bit just telling you the story, because he said, Steve, it's been a bloodbath. He said, we've had to sack people. We've had to help get people working from home. It's been 18-hour days. It's been a bloodbath. At that point, I realised that there has never been a more important time than now to focus on the culture. And yet the paradox, in my view, is that the likelihood is that that is the least thing that's being focused on. Because in the busyness of trying to bed things down and get a new operational model in place, I worry that culture is now relegated to a second or third tier priority. Now, if it is a priority, there's a whole new dimension at play. Because you know that Zoom meetings are very different to face-to-face meetings. And there's some subtle, but I think nonetheless important things in a Zoom virtual context, which we need to attend to within our businesses. You know, I've participated in a few in-company virtual conferences where a number of people have had their videos off. You know, what does that say? I participate in a few virtual meetings where, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I find this really off-putting, where there are separate conversations happening in the chat box. Like, if we're at a meeting with 15 people physically in a room, and there's 3 people in the corner over there having a conversation about something they did on the weekend or whatever, I mean, are we going to tolerate that? But it's happening in a virtual context. So, you know, my thinking is that we just need to create some no longer unwritten ground rules about how we perform. Now, overlay on top of that, and I think there are 4 cultural attributes that I reckon you can push your values to one side for the time being. I honestly do. Because I reckon there is 4 undisputable cultural attributes, undisputable, I don't know what the right word is, not disputable attributes that every organisation ought to be fighting for right now. And they are these. This is in the post-COVID context. Number 1, transparency. Every person now wants to know, in this context, what's happening to me and my career and what's happening in the business. And if the answer is, I don't know, then I want to know that. So transparency is a cultural attribute we ought to all be fighting for. Another is agility. You all know that if you can't move fast now, then good luck, because your competitors are. Because we need to be so agile. And if there are roadblocks to quick decisions then that needs to be attended to. So agility is the second one. The third one is creativity and innovation. If we aren't tapping in to the creative ideas that all of our people have, then good luck. And the fourth and most important one is care/support. Talking to that leader of that franchise company made me realise, I said to him, you are spending all your energy looking after your people and caring for them. Is anyone caring for the leadership team? And you know the answer to that. But this care and support in these, I mean, who's not feeling fear, stress and uncertainty? I mean, I bloody am. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of how much, and where on the ebb of flow of this each of us is. So goodness me, if we aren't looking after our people and being conscious and explicit about that, then we're in trouble. Things have changed, and we've got to change. As leaders, we must change.
I know in some of my one-on-one conversations with people on the call, these are the things we call them heart qualities, like care is one, appreciation is another. It's no secret if you ask any psychologist, what's the deepest need of people, and they will often give you the William James answer, who was an eminent psychologist years ago, that the deepest human desire is to feel appreciated. So it's not any old desire, according to James, but the deepest. And so it's caring for people, helping them to feel appreciated, to feel valued. It's being compassionate. Like you, Steve, I've been calling lots of people to say, well, how are you going? There's no other agenda. It's just how you're going, I've mentioned to some people, it's a kindness call, because, that's what we need right now. We need kindness. And we need it in bucket loads. I know, Jamie, you and I have talked about this a lot in our one-on-ones. The world needs better humans. And you're for, I reckon, Steve, with the last one, care and support underpinning the other three. It's the future. What are other folks thought? We're not going back to where we were, folks. We're not going back. Thank God, I think, in many ways. We're not going back.
Well, we're reversing in Victoria.
Well, I think there's going to be challenges. All the health people that I've watched and listened to are saying, this thing's not going away. There's going to be challenges.
So, to circle back, there's a key issue here, and that is, if you believe that those 4 attributes or variations of them are important, then there's a key question. And the key question is, so what are our UGRs right now in relation to those 4 cultural attributes? And you know how it's different in a Zoom meeting compared to face-to-face? One of the differences is an apparent lack of desire for people to speak in Zoom meetings, more so than used to be the case in face-to-face meetings. So if you have a thought that you'd like to share, help me out here, share it.
Or one of our UGRs in these gatherings is, I just name you and you speak.
Well,
to avoid this one. But David's got one for us.
Yeah, I was going to comment earlier as well. I work at Bendigo Bank. It's obviously a fairly large organisation. I think they try their best to alter culture, and recently they've gone about some critical behaviours which we're rolling out across the whole organisation, and they're quite good the way they've rolled them out. The difficulty that I've noticed with Bendigo Bank, which is probably similar to what Simone, I reckon, would experience within the council. I think Bendigo Bank's like a government organisation in a lot of ways. Like, people are in there and like a for life type job, or in some ways. So when they see these changes come around, I think, righto, how long is this going to last? That's what the general group of the people, so they almost outweigh what the leaders try to implement. So they've got the best of intentions, I think, the leaders, and me then is like an intermediary lead to try to roll it out in the most positive and productive way that we can. But what I've sort of worked out lately is, particularly in the branch network, with a lot of mothers in the roles, like they're there for a different purpose. They don't really care about whether the bank is successful. Like they sort of loosely do, but they're more worried about providing for their families at home. Like that's more important to them. So that's what I try to focus on. Right, we want to make sure that your family's looked after. So the best way for us to do that is to maintain you being as happy as you can be at work, and that's just a smaller way of impacting culture that we can do locally. But my view is that, and Ian's talked about this a long time ago when I first met him, with the concept of changing an organisation, the first person that needs to change is the individual, whether it's the leader or it might be the mother at work. All right, yep, I get what they're trying to do here. I'll try and help the person next to me adopt this change. I think if they can all do that together, then they're more likely to have a cultural shift. But because it's such a big organisation, so many moving parts to it, trying to change the whole culture of it is really difficult.
Isn't it fascinating how, you know, putting other people first is not a new idea. You know, I talked about all change being personal first, you know, for 30 years. But one of the guys I first learned this off was a guy by the name of Zig Ziglar, who many of you would know. And, you know, he passed a few years ago. But, you know, Zig had a wonderful line. You know, he said something along the lines of the simplest way, the easiest way to get what you want is to help other people get what they want.
That feels good too when you do it. Like
that's what you're saying, isn't it, Dave? The unwritten ground rule is I'll help my employees, you know, be a good mum and be able to look after their families. That's a great way to put people first, isn't it? Anne, you were coming in there.
Yeah, I've only ever heard good things about Bendigo, and so I think you've got a head start in terms of your culture evolving and putting your people at the centre of that. But and to add to that and to add to what Steve was saying, I mean, in the care and support, and we really care about our people. My sense is that COVID is really going to sort out the organisations that paid lip service to that, and those who had the unwritten ground rule, which was, you know, we'll give everybody mental health support and mental well-being and all that kind of stuff, but really we're just ticking a box. And now we're going to see whether or not there was a genuine commitment to that. And what we're seeing across the board, and you're seeing the numbers the same way as I am, anxiety, depression, and so on, skyrocketing. And you have to stop and say, well, how much is the workplace contributing to that? I mean, there are all the other things that are going on. And Steve, I think you talked about the bloodbath of sacked people, 18-hour days, you know, that whole transition to getting people to working from home. Safety issues have gone out the window, both physical safety, mental safety, and all I'm hearing, I'm not hearing positive stories such as David's saying. I'm hearing from organisations that people are working harder. They've never worked so hard from home or anywhere in their whole lives. And their organisation is saying, oh, go and have a look at these online courses from Black Dog Institute, they'll help. You know, and so I think COVID is just going to sort out in real unwritten ground rule terms, were we committed to doing what we should be doing in care and support, or was it still, yeah, tick the box, we've still got to get on and make money. We've done that now.
The one thing that I just wanted to add was I was in a meeting with some of the executive and the CEO yesterday, and the CEO said, okay, all of these are my priorities, but I just need to make sure for the next month that I don't break Simone. So that's my priority, is not to break Simone. So I think that's pretty telling, I guess, but running off the back of you, Anne, about kind of the pressures that are faced. And I'm like, there's a lot that can actually be done, but okay, you've said it, but what are you going to do to back that up?
Can I get clarification when they said that their number one priority was not to break you? Was that because you're the one that's actually going to be actioning that long list of priorities for them? Is that, yeah, okay, I was interpreting correctly. Right, okay. Oh boy.
Within all of this is a lot of opportunity with the COVID-19 environment. The people, like the businesses that will come through this and see it as an opportunity and the possibilities of what could be, they'll be extremely successful. And there's lots of opportunities within the COVID-19 environment. I think you're right about getting those nuts and bolts right with the culture. And it's not even that difficult a process, really, is it? Like, it's stripping it back and just keeping it simple. And I think if you keep I think you're almost better off getting rid of UGRs. We can have them be written now. They have them WGRs and written ground rules. I think that would solve the problem.
No, you're right, and we've had some companies do that. Actually, have the header on a little index card, WGRs. This is the way we do things around here. Because I think, David, you have really touched on something which I think is overlooked in the vast majority of attempts to transform cultures, and that is gaining shared ownership. This is not the sole province of leadership teams. They've got to be on board. Without that, it will not work. But it is not the sole responsibility of leaders. And I think too many staff take a cop-out position of sitting down, pointing upwards and saying, if only they'd fix things up, we'd be okay. That's a cop-out, but often done unconsciously. So we can, the context you described, David, is really quite fascinating, because if you've got these, as you described them, the mothers whose primary interest is earning a living to look after their family, I would suspect that even those people would love to be part of a dynamic, positive, productive team where there's genuine pride. I don't suspect that. I know that.
And they do. Sorry to interrupt. And they definitely do. When we create that feel, like the good feel element, like they look forward to coming to work. There's a couple of them in particular that look forward to coming because they've got some disruptive younger kids, so they look forward to coming to work and actually impacting. I think for now, some of them they're just happy just doing that for now, even though they've got so much potential. Some of these women that they could be more than what they already are, but for now, all they're focused on is getting their kids to a stage where they're ready to be able to be let go, I suppose, and in part then that changes how they approach their work. But I think it's spot on. Like if their mindset's right and they're open, but I think the starting point was to acknowledge the fact that that's why they're there first.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, Murray,
Steve.
I noticed you put your hand up a while back, Murray, so just get you in the conversation here.
Yeah, just trying to jump in there. Just to pick up, Steve, on what you mentioned about your 5 key cultural attributes, creativity and innovation. And I guess I'd link that to the opportunity that we have now to be innovative and to be in the way that we communicate with our people within the business, the way we communicate throughout the business, and then obviously the way we communicate to our customers as well too, to grow that base as well.
Oh yeah, Murray, so this gives me an opportunity to share with you how we can capture the current UGRs. We can find out what the current UGRs are, okay? So our starting position, and Murray, this is to your point, our starting position is to say, what is the culture that we are fighting for? What's the aspirational culture? They can be articulated as values. I don't care what you call them, it doesn't matter. What is the culture we are fighting for? And you can arrive at that conversation at that decision, those words, by affirming the current values or by asking yourself the question, What does our culture need to look and feel like for us to truly be successful while making this a great place to work? That's a bit of a golden question as well. What does our culture need to look and feel like for us to truly be successful while making this a great place to work? Or you could pick up those 4 attributes that I talk about. Now, I lump a couple of them together, Murray. So I say transparency, agility, creativity and innovation. That's I call 1. And the last is support and care. So whatever you arrive at, our argument is we must have, as an organisation, an aspirational culture that we are fighting for. Without that, what are we fighting for? So we must have an aspirational culture. We can then find out what the current UGRs are in relation to each of those cultural attributes. So this is your point, Murray. So if we're fighting for creativity and innovation, and this is based on world first research undertaken by 2 Australian universities, we discovered that we can unearth the prevailing UGRs simply by getting people anonymously to complete the sentence to what we now call lead-in sentences. Lead-in sentences. So in our research, for example, we've got people to complete this sentence anonymously. Around here, customers are. Now, the responses we got to that were gobsmacking. We literally had people say, customers are a pain in the arse. We literally had somebody say this, around here, customers are an interruption to my working day. I kid you not. I kid you not. So we realised at that point, and this is like 25 years ago, that there can be a stark and 180-degree difference between our values or any statement of our aspirational culture and our UGRs. And if the UGRs, if they are different, which will win? It's going to be the UGRs every time. The UGRs are what drives people's behaviour. So we've refined this. And now what we do is we say, let's craft lead-in sentences to link to the culture that we're fighting for. So here's your point, Murray. Creativity, innovation. I wonder how your people would complete this sentence around here when someone comes up with a new idea. I wonder how your people would complete that sentence. Now, we formulate this in what we call a UGR stock take. We avoid the use of the word survey because there are UGRs to do with surveys, and it goes like this. Around here, we have a survey every year. Nothing happens, so why bother to treat it seriously? So we deliberately don't call it a survey, we call it a stock take, where we have lead-in sentences crafted to link back to our aspirational culture. And we've included, and so you can imagine every stock take that we do is different because we're crafting it for that organisation to link to their values or aspirational culture. But over 30 years, we've done a lot of them, and there's some common ones that typically will be there. And one of them is that one, around here, when someone comes up with a new idea. I kid you not, we've had people write this literally in response to that lead-in sentence. Around here, when someone comes up with a new idea, bosses pinch the good ideas and use them as their own. I kid you not. Now, whether or not my UGR is justified is irrelevant, because my point here is that my UGRs are driving my behaviour. So the next meeting I'd go to, Zoom or otherwise, where the boss says any ideas and how we can improve this, what am I going to do? If my UGR is bosses pinch the good ideas and use them as their own, I'm going to say, no, I can't think of anything right now. That's driving my behaviour. So that's where we need the alignment between the culture that we're fighting for, our aspirational culture, and the UGRs.
And Steve, a really
My
interesting...
point before, the opportunity to improve that, if we can meet that UGR at this time, is so much greater than it has been in the past. If we can meet that.
Murray, what we do is we collect this. We can collect the UGRs, and Jamie's been part of this. Jamie knows this process, and we share the results back out to everyone. We get the written words. We share this back out to everyone to let them see the world through other people's eyes, and it is gobsmacking for people to read. And if there's areas of concern in there, which there will be, if there's areas of concern, we then say, so what can we do? What can we do to make improvements here? And that's where we want to get shared ownership for this stuff. You know, we got to start talking real, and we've got to have shared ownership for this. You know, I mean, anytime I go into a company and they say, oh, we've been working on this model over the past 5 years, that's when I'm starting to think, oh, here we go. Just the word model, or, let's start talking real, let's use the language, let's cut the bullshit, and talk for real. And the UGRs is real, and we can put them on the table and not point at people and saying you're wrong for thinking that, but rather say, what can we do individually and collectively to make improvements here? And let's own this, and let's think about things that we personally, each of us, can do differently, Otherwise, it's window dressing, I think.
Well, it becomes what Dan was saying. It's a tick box exercise, and it's just ignoring the reality. I mean, there's enough of that in the world at the moment. We don't need it, and especially in the organizations. And until you're willing to actually accept and admit that you have been ignoring that reality, and because it's too hard or it's whatever, and it's a motive, we don't deal with that stuff. Give me a formula. Silver bullet is what I'm after. If I need A plus B plus C equals D, that isn't, no, this is to do with people. It doesn't do A plus B. That's the first step that people have to understand. And as you said, Steve, in those responses, we've developed something similar. I love your stock take rather than survey thing, though, by the way, is that it's all about finding out where they are on their evolution of their own culture, right? You need to understand. And frankly, for what we do currently is, if they're not at an evolutionary state, that we can come in and help them because we work a little bit differently, but that's a whole other story. Then that's where I would say, you need to go talk to Steve Simpson, or you need to talk to a lady Marie Rack here in Perth.
I know Marie. I know Marie. Yeah.
Who does that? That's more of the front end stuff, because you're not mature enough to be able to deal with how we can help you in the other aspects of your business. Not what you're going to want to hear, but it's a fact. And unfortunately, so many organizations are in that space. But until they're willing to actually take that on board and put their big person pants on, and have tap into some of that EQ instead of IQ, then it's not going to happen.
Part of the problem I'm seeing within our organisation is, and particularly off the back of the Royal Commission, Banking Royal Commission, is the lack of incentive. So you've got, I've noticed it even with interacting with Commonwealth Bank, you used to have these bank people desperately trying to sell you something, but now they couldn't give it stuff like that, right? Because there's nothing in it for them. They've lost their will and desire to get their little bonus that they were going to get that they can't get anymore because the carrot's gone. There's got to be something in there like the reward and recognition piece within culture to make it say, righto, we're going to reward you, but you've got to get these written ground rules first. So you've got to adopt them and embrace them. And there you go, open and say you can be eligible to be part of a recognition program.
So, David, that reminds me of, I worked for 4 years with McLaren Automotive in the UK. Some of you will know that McLaren have a Formula One team. I wasn't working with that division. I was working with the division that makes road cars. Entry-level price, $375,000. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So the premises are there. I wish I could show slides, Ian, because I'd show you 187 photos I took of McLaren. But anyway, it is remarkable. But they were very smart because they did 4 successive stock takes, and they tied, how clever is this? They tied a percentage of their bonus for leaders to improvements on the UGR stock take year on year. How clever is that? Now that's putting your money where your mouth is. So we're going to tie bonus payments to cultural improvements. And you can't.
That's not only that's not just smart, but that should be a given in any organization if they're really true and really think and understand the value. If they understand, appreciate, and have a value proposition for what culture is, and it's the absolute foundation you build everything else on, then that it needs to be representative in their motivation and their incentives and their KPIs.
How'd they do
Without
it?
a doubt, it's a no-brainer, but very few are. Very few are. As a matter of fact, the KPIs usually work against them. That's what we've found.
How'd they go about doing that?
Well, first of all, you have to educate them. As Steve said, most of them are ignorant. They don't know what they don't know at that point with regard to their what I call head nodders. They've read, they've heard something, or they've been to a seminar, or they might have read part of a book, and so they know, as my dear mom used to say, just enough to be dangerous in the world of culture. And they say, "Oh yeah, we know it's important," and they know a couple of catchphrases, and they go, "Yeah, nod, nod, nod," but they really don't understand what it's all about. They don't understand Steve's definition of what the UGR. It's a people's perceptions of how things are done around here, and that's the power. If you don't tap into that and understand that, you're just going off. You're 100 degrees to port every time you set a course. Anytime you're doing strategy, you're not even close unless you understand that. Yeah. And so that's the starting point. You start with that. Let's get them understanding what that's all about, and then start taking them on the journey. Yeah.
I mean, Steve's mentioned a couple of times about that we're maybe unconscious about these things, and so I suggest that one of the starting points is to increase consciousness. Like one of the things, I ask when I work with leadership teams, the first time I work with them, I ask them to define what leadership is for them. Most don't have one.
Or they don't realize there's a distinct difference between leadership and management. They muddle the two up.
All that kind of stuff. So it's, I would regard self-awareness as the number one leadership skill, and yet the majority of self-leaders aren't self-aware.
Self-aware second, the close second was social aware. Goldman's 4 pillars or whatever. But you have to be self-aware first, but then you have to be socially aware, and those are distinct skills. And guess what? They're not teaching them in business school.
I've got a different view to Goldman. I think that awareness of other people is the second one. I like his 4, but I think number 1, self-awareness. Number 2 is awareness of other people. And so I was going to say earlier, Steve, one of my lead-ins to this aspirational culture, one of my questions would be around here, caring for you and supporting you means.
Yeah, and that's good, Anne. That's really good. Although my only caveat would be, in the framing of lead-in sentences, we need to be very careful not to invite a definition. So there's I don't know what it is that makes a good lead-in sentence, but
so we might have to reword that one so that
subtle, just a very subtle change somehow. But
leading sentences that are not leading.
Well, yeah, I guess that's right. Yeah.
All right, folks. So we've got about 10 minutes remaining, folks. So it's been great so far. Is there anything burning in your heart that you'd like to ask Steve before we come to the formal end?
Steve, can I just make a comment around purpose? And it struck me, and particularly listening to David and the others around incentives. For some organisations now, incentives are not possible because they're just not making enough for that to happen. But purpose could be more powerful. And you talked about we've talked about unwritten ground rules of keeping ideas to ourselves, not sharing them, being stolen, and so on. I'm just thinking about how the scientific world, the researchers, have just bandied together to share their IP and ideas around how do we beat this damn virus. I don't know about you, but it just didn't seem that I would ever live in a world where researchers who make a fortune out of their patents and everything else for farmers, pharmaceuticals and so on, would share and come together. And it strikes me that is an example of where purpose, i.e. saving us all from eternal damnation or whatever this thing is, has overridden all the unwritten ground rules. And I'm just wondering if we can just sort of use that to help organisations find something to bandy people together to aspire to the culture, even in the current times.
Yeah, you raise really good points, and I think the worrying thing is, should it take a crisis to bandy us together? You know, that's point number one. But I'm also with you on the reward and the recognition, and it's probably a bad example to give the McLaren one, because I think more meaningful is recognition rather than rewards. And I think that the level of seniority of a person and their age is totally irrelevant when it comes to the need for authentic, genuine recognition. I've never heard of a person quitting their job and the reason they gave was that I got too much positive feedback. So this recognition thing, I think, is way undervalued. And I think there's an expectation in too many places that it has to come from senior leaders. You know, I mean, it can come from any direction. I mean, a lot of leaders are lonely and feeling undervalued. You know, what's wrong with their people? Giving them some recognition. You know, we're people, for goodness sake.
Leaders have to lead, and if they do, and when you say authentic, I was using the word sincere in my head. Basically, the same thing. They have to be that true when they're given. But if you're given and you're the leader in the organization, either by title and action, but certainly by action in this instance, and you're giving sincere, authentic feedback, and it's positive, and you're supporting, it will come back. And those are elements that's one of the elements of building really good, positive cultures is when everybody's doing that, obviously. And it is more motivational. And there are studies that will prove that it is more motivational than the tangible financial backing or incentives, without a doubt, by a long shot. But it has to be sincere and authentic. Yeah.
Come in there, Ruth.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Steve. I'd love to make a comment around that too, Steve. I think you've just opened chapter 2 of this conversation, which is around Australian culture, unwritten ground rules. Because in Australia, you don't say thanks. You don't, because that'll make you big-headed. It'll spoil you, and you're the tall poppy, and tall poppies get cut down. So, you know, that's another thing. I couldn't agree with you more. Human beings need recognition. We need appreciation. And at the same time, that's one of our biggest unwritten ground rules in Australia that we need to rewrite.
We feel funny about taking it sometimes, don't we? Like someone will give you a compliment and it just feels like, oh, shit's out of the blue. Like, oh, no, that wasn't any good. I was just normal, protocol sort of stuff. I was on a session last week with Cameron Schwab, who I'm sure some of you know. And there's a couple of comments that he made, which I wrote down. We talked about trying to achieve certain outcomes. He talks about people don't rise to their aspirations, they fall to their systems. And I think your systems are part of your culture. And then the other comment that I took away from it, looking at an organisation at their culture, he said, tired eyes see, tired eyes see a tired world. So if you're feeling sad and down in the dumps and you got your weak in your mental health, well, everything looks like crap around it, doesn't it? But if you can try and get rid of that tiredness and feel a bit better about yourself, well, you'll see things a bit better.
Yeah, or just tired from looking at it so long and hard.
Yeah,
so you just have to take a step back from it. Yeah.
I think you raise an interesting point, Ruth, and thank you, David, for giving some examples there. I think what I might do is as you know, I run these Tuesdays and Wednesdays, first and third Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I think there's a fascinating conversation could be had around cultural UGRs as different to culture UGRs.
Oh, definitely. Oh,
I reckon that. So, Steve, you're invited back. We'll work out a date to have that conversation.
Look, I'll give you a quick example. I was invited. A consultant in Asia contacted me and said, "Have you licensed UGRs? Because I'd be interested in buying a license." And I actually ended up dissuading him because as you know, and this is it's a big generalisation, I know, to talk about Asia, but I've done a bit of work in Asia, and there are such strong cultural UGRs to do with things like leadership, and not challenging authority and all this sort of stuff that would make it very tough, So it's a good point, Ruth.
Which is interesting, which in the birthplace of Kaizen, there seem to be at different ends of the spectrum where you get a group of people trying to figure out the best way to do something, but that's among themselves, but you wouldn't challenge anyone on a higher echelon because that's a cultural issue. Yeah.
I've done a lot of work with Toyota, so I sort of know the Japanese way a little bit, and that is very strongly and strictly process driven. This is process. This is all about process, and it's locked in hard. But anyway, that's chapter 2, as you say, Ruth.
One of the things we'll do is I'll put a couple of links that I'll send you, because one of the things that we've talked about and that I talk about in my work a lot is called shared view. Steve, you call it having a shared thing. I mean, over here is your view and over here is mine, that only works when they're together and there's ours. So I'll put a link into that work for you, because I've done a number of short videos and podcasts around how to do that. We'll also put some links to some of your stock take information, Steve, so that people know what that is, and whatever else you and I can come up with that might be valuable. We've got a few minutes still, if there's anything else that is... Jamie?
Yeah, just two quick ones for me. And Anne, I go back to your researchers one, and I'm wondering if they're all actually banding together to try and find something to save us, because the financial outcome to them will be amazing in the end. As you say, they're already making enough now. Why would they band it together? Because if you find something that fixes this, you're going to be, don't know about Bill Gates and others, you'll be way above them. And secondly, Steve, I really love, number one, the transparency, because if you want to fix the UGR of people's perceptions about the way we do things around here, be very transparent post-COVID about your organisation and about your mental health and about the reasons and why you're doing things or why you're not doing things. So if you can have some really, you get the creativity and the love and the care and everything are so important, but I think the transparency creates this amazing UGR about people's perceptions and the way we do things around here. So.
Well, it certainly starts to build one of the major building blocks, which is trust. Understanding again, right?
Absolutely.
So that's key.
Yeah, correct.
I assume you've seen the 5 Monkeys experiment, Steve?
Yes, yeah, it's in my book, David.
No, is it really? I haven't read your book. It's like that's the thing that I've noticed the most about working at Bendigo Bank, having come from a major bank. We're not trying to say, I reckon we should go and do business development this way. They're calling me back saying, no, that's not how we do it around here. Like the culture is as fair as anything within different organisations. And that Monkeys experiment, I think it's a perfect way to illustrate it.
Steve's got 2 great books. One is Cracking the Corporate Culture Code, which is where we borrowed the title for today's conversation from. But there's also A Culture Turn, which is your latest, Steve, and it's a fable for part of it. But tell us the main thrust of that book.
Well, it's a story of culture change, which is fictional, but it's not, because every piece in there is true, but garnered from different organisations that we worked with. And it tells the story of how to use UGRs as the vehicle for culture transformation. And it walks the reader through the 5 steps that we use. So yeah, it is fictional, but not. And there's a story there. I kid you not, of a leader talking to all of his staff. Now, the true story is the sales and marketing division of a large company, meeting in a conference room. I wasn't even in the room, but this incident became legendary within the company, and I would imagine still exists to this day, because the leader, the day prior to this conference, one of the guys on the staff, one of the younger blokes, did something on social media which he shouldn't have. Bad mistake. The conference is the next day. In front of everyone, the leader points at this young bloke and goes, "Be careful, young man, be careful," in front of everyone. Now, when I do this face to face, I say to people, so what's the UGR here? And people will say, never make a mistake. And I say, I disagree. I think the UGR is never get caught making a mistake. Now, this is sales and marketing, right? They're meant to be agile, creative, trying out new things. Good luck with that, if that's the UGR, right? That's the power of UGRs. So that story's in the book, but it's fictional, but it's true.
We'll put that in the post conversation links that I'll send out to you probably tomorrow. We'll put links to those books, because I recommend both those books. So final opportunity before we go. I'm just going to have a think about that. I'm just going to share my screen with you briefly, just to show you what's coming up next, and I'm going to send this to you. But in terms of the guest, you'll see Anne's right in the middle there, because she's coming up on August the 5th. But before that, we've got some other things, and I've given them all a title. So I'm not going to go through that today, but I will send it to you in the email that has the link, so you'll know what the topics are for up until the end of August. People have asked, well, what are you going to be talking about? Give us some advance warning. So hopefully I've replied to that request for folks. Last opportunity before we go.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say, Steve, I had finished your book, and it is very good, and it's a very easy read and very easy to understand. Not all of these books are. They're quite academic. Now yours is very, very, very good. So I highly recommend it, and it puts it in perspective. And I was going back.
Michael,
you were saying lots of examples, and I have hundreds of others over, because I'm old.
Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
That's very good. Highly recommend it.
And in the spirit of recognition and so on, Steve, I've heard you talk about this. I've worked with you in this area. You never, ever fail to disappoint with your thinking on this. It's just groundbreaking. It still is. Just thank you so much for what you've done.
Thank you, Anne. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
So I gave Steve a big build up at the start. And Steve, thank you for delivering as always.
Cheers, mate. Thanks, Anne.
Good work.
See you all next time.